Nari screamed beneath Rohl's hands as he worked on her face. She was shackled to the table, her head clamped in place to keep it still, her mouth held open with vices. Her master was drilling dentures into her gums, where the mad woman had left her toothless.
I've half a mind to let you keep screaming,
the apothecary growled, his vox grill amplifying his voice over his slaves, still installing the dentures as he spoke.
When I told you to vox me if she woke, I expected you to keep vigil. I didn't predict the subject would wake up so volatile. But even if she hadn't, you should have been awake to tell me. Next time, I don't care if you have to use an adrenaline dosage or contraband recaf. Let this be a lesson to never fall asleep on the job.
The girl, unable to speak or move her head, blinked twice in acknowledgement, the action shoving tears of pain down her temples. Rohl finished installing the dentures and began sewing a skin graft to her cheek, the tone of her agonized cries altered with the pain.
However,
he continued, his tone dropping subtly to a somewhat gentler one.
You noticed the state of the subject's arm before I did, and accurately assessed the necessary treatment.
He finished attaching the graft and lifted his hand, a long needle extending from his narthecium.
For that, you may have pain suppressants.
Nari made a noise of surprise as Rohl injected the chemical into her jaw. The pain receded to a dull ache almost immediately, and she exhaled with relief. Rohl removed the clamps and shackles, sat her up, and began bandaging the injury.
You'll be on a purely liquid diet for a few weeks. You may retire to your quarters for the night, but I expect you to be present for work tomorrow.
She nodded, her eyes showing gratitude and admiration beneath the discomfort. Then the door slammed open, and they both turned at the sound. Captain Garek, his helm removed, was carrying the sleeping madwoman on his shoulder. The madwoman, in her frenzy, had torn open many of the wounds that Rohl had previously closed, her blood flowing in tiny rivers down the captain's armor. Garek tossed the woman to the apothecary as casually as a child would a ball. Rohl caught her with the same casual ease.
"Patch this one up,"
the captain ordered.
"And keep her unconscious until she's healed."
His black eyes drifted to Nari.
"I don't want another incident like that."
The girl shifted uncomfortably, but did not respond. The apothecary nodded.
Understood.
When Malia finally awoke, she didn't ask why she'd been asleep, nor did she inquire as to how much time had passed. She simply got up and off the table, as alert as if she hadn't been drugged at all, and began dressing in the clothing she found waiting on the tray beside her. She paid no heed to the apothecary's silent, helmed stare, nor his slave's cowardly glances. She simply donned the black shirt, trousers and boots, as casually as if she were donning her armor. Her bolter, surprisingly, had been laid beneath the clothing, a shoulder strap now attached to it, along with a vox bead. She slung the weapon over her shoulder and placed the bead in her ear. It activated almost instantly. Garek spoke from the other end of the vox and relayed her first orders. Without hesitation, she headed for the door. Before she could leave, however, she was first hounded with questions from Rohl.
What are you?
Malia turned and blinked up at him, her eyes uncertain and slightly dazed.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Don't make me repeat myself, woman,
he snapped impatiently, his voice distorted by his vox grill. Behind him, Nari cowered behind a cogitator console, half her face still wrapped in gauze. Both her master and the woman ignored her.
Between your injuries, infection, blood loss, starvation, dehydration, and falling from a height that should have killed you despite wearing power armor. Your body refused to die. I estimate your recovery to end within half a year, and you've completely healed in only a third of that time. I've never seen that kind of resilience in an unaugmented human.
The apothecary gestured to the cogitator behind which Nari stood. On its screens were images of graphs and other data of blood and tissue samples he'd taken from Malia during her unconscious state. Specifically, he was pointing at the graph of her genetic code.
Explain all these anomalies I found while treating you. Unless you're a sanctioned mutant or some new breed of ogrin, no one in the Imperium would have allowed you in their ranks, let alone allowed to live.
He lowered his arm and took a step forward in emphasis.
So, what in the warp are you?
Malia just looked at him for a long moment, sorrow underlying her vacant expression. Unconsciously, almost imperceptibly, her left eye twitched.
I wish I knew,
she said, then walked through the doorway before he could question her further. When she was far enough away, she stopped and placed her hand upon the corridor's metal wall. She felt a headache coming, as well as the first drop of blood leaking down her nose. Sometimes the post-battle headaches came when she was asked about her origins, even when she herself questioned them. And as with all her headaches, she did not know why. What she did know was that it always hurt. So without care if anyone saw her, and plenty of passing crewmen did, Malia leaned back, then rocked forward and slammed her head into the wall with enough force to leave a small dent in the metal. It wasn't the same as the fall that had nearly killed her. The height and her velocity that night had increased the force of the impact when her head had met the ground. With lesser impacts, such as her current self-inflicted one, her skull was sturdy enough that she'd only have a small bruise later. After a few moments, her headache passed. Malia then wiped her nose with her sleeve and went to receive her slave coin before carrying out her orders. Malia served as Garek's artificer, repairing his armor and weapons as needed, and as an enforcer among the crew and slaves of the lower decks. Though her own armor and chainsword remained in Garek's possession, the fact that she was permitted to carry her bolter and pouches of spare magazines was all she needed to carry out her duties. The bolter, defaced Aquila and all, served as a clear warning to anyone who crossed her path that she was not one to be trifled with. Even the violent gangs lurking in the ship's lowest dregs dared not challenge a sister of battle, fallen or otherwise. Those who did quickly learned their mistake, often left maimed by bolt rounds and missing a limb, and their teeth, which she'd take afterward for good measure. Malia soon came to enjoy her life and her freedom aboard the Slayer's Vow. A twice-daily workout routine in her quarters kept her musculature at its peak. Her hair had grown longer, fuller, and some crew members whispered amongst themselves about her increasingly ever-present grin. She kept Garek's weapons and war gear in flawless condition, the Astartes and his servant occasionally trading stories of past battles and preferred methods of bloodshed. She was never reprimanded for wearing the teeth of those she disciplined. That alone was the most liberating of all. A few months after waking from her drug-induced coma, Malia had become the center of a new kind of ire. The other slaves were openly jealous of her privileges, and she couldn't be bothered to care. All that mattered was Garek keeping his end of their deal. Even better, he went beyond just protecting her from pursuers. He let her be herself. One such night, Garek summoned her to the interrogation deck. She entered the chamber, taking in the skinless, still breathing body splayed atop tables and hanging from hooks and chains. The blood on the floor, some fresh, some long dried, The stink of gore mingled with a sour reek of fear and filth, and the endless guttural screams of those whose vocal cords hadn't yet been severed. Garek stood at the center of the room. He was currently helmless, but otherwise fully armed and armored. His new chainsword, her eviscerator, though for him it was merely a chainsword, was mag-locked to his side. He maintained his focus as she walked in, his armored hands methodically flaying the skin from the wretch laid out before him. The victim's shrieks blended into the chorus of agony echoing through the chamber, while the wet squelch of torn flesh pulsed beneath it all. Malia ignored it completely, unfazed as she approached the Night Lord.
What do you need, Captain?
She asked, raising her voice just enough to carry over the screaming. Without looking up, Garek handed her the raking tool he'd been using, its teeth caked with viscera and clotted gore.
This needs cleaning,
he said. Malia took it with a nod.
Understood.
She stepped toward the tray of other implements, set the tool aside, and crouched to retrieve the cleaning kit tucked beneath it. She opened the kit and began cleaning the tool, her movements as meticulous and focused as the Space Marine behind her. The screams and squelches quickly became little more than background noise in her ears.
About your sword,
the Night Lord said abruptly. The wretch under his hands made a gargled cry of suffering.
I noticed its power field doesn't work.
Malia kept her eyes on her own task, scraping gunk out of the rake's teeth. Her metal hand clanked lightly against the rake. She'd gotten so used to the augmetic, sometimes she'd forget the original hand had been replaced.
I'm aware.
Zephyria said he doesn't have one at all.
There was a spine-chilling sound of nerves being tugged and pulled from their casings of muscle. The wretch screamed again.
She was rather perplexed. Thought perhaps you had broke it.
I didn't. It was always like that.
She put down the rake and rummaged through the cleaning kit, bringing out a flask of rubbing oil and a rough spun cloth.
Honestly, it was probably intentional.
Malia poured the oil on the cloth and began scrubbing the rake.
I never fit in with the sisters. No matter what I did to prove my zeal, how many I killed, how hard I prayed, I was never able to channel the Emperor's power into one of their battlefield miracles.
She paused her task for a moment, her head bowed in thought.
They probably gave me that weapon as a reminder of that fault.
Was Garek's response. They both continued their work in relative silence. After several minutes, her thoroughness was rewarded with a gleaming, unmarred implement. She set it down and prepared to pack the cleaning gear away, then froze, her hand above the tray. Her gaze settled on a set of pliers beside the Astarte-sized scalpel. The pliers were large, like most of the other tools, but a small impulse deep within her mind believed that she could wield them. Her hand lowered without realizing and lifted the pliers from the tray.
Captain,
she said suddenly, her voice distracted and distant.
May I make an odd request?
Garek tore a particularly long strand of sinew from the wretch, dragging out its scream.
That depends on the request.
She turned to him, vaguely aware of the bloodlust and fervor shining behind her eyes.
May I have a turn?
Now, the Night Lord paused his machinations and looked up to meet her gaze, his hands suddenly still. Several seconds of silence passed between them, the screams and moans of pain temporarily forgotten. She realized her request must have caught him off guard for him to be silent this long, but she did not recant her question. Then, to her surprise, Garek stepped aside. Malia's eyes lit up with excitement as she stepped up to the table, and looked at the man without skin. Malia grabbed the nearest tray and dragged it to her side. She gripped the pliers, which should not have fit her hand, but did, and began indulging her temptations. Garek watched in attentive silence as she took the dying man's teeth. The wretch screamed even louder than he had while being flayed, likely more from Malia's expression of absolute childlike glee than the agony of her stealing his teeth. The woman gave each tooth ample attention as she held the wretch's mouth open by the jaw. She grabbed one with the pliers, yanked, and deposited the tooth in her mouth. Garek's eyebrows rose slightly as he watched her use her own saliva to clean the tooth of blood, then spit out the blood, remove the tooth from her mouth, and place it on the empty tray. She repeated the action 7 more times before pausing for a moment and looking up from her work.
So, what do you do with these things when you're done with them?
She asked, nodding to the wretch.
Chop them up and feed them to the crew?
The Night Lord's mouth twitched slightly in amusement.
Only when they die. Otherwise, we give them to Zephyria.
She gave him a confused look, and he shrugged, his pauldrons clanking with emotion.
She likes to make servitors.
The woman's double blinks were the only sign that his answer surprised her. Then a moment later, she shrugged indifferently and went back to pulling teeth. The wretch's screams grew louder from the sheer terror of their conversation. Not long after that, Garek summoned her again, this time to the main armory. When she arrived, the Night Lords were still returning from their latest raid. Blood dripped from their armor in slow, steady trails. Garek stood among them like a monument to carnage, his pauldrons slick, fresh skulls hanging at his waist. Some of the skulls were stripped clean, others still bore scraps of flesh. Malia stepped around a puddle thick with congealed gore and approached him, her eyes curious and observant. He tossed the eviscerator to her, the blood nearly causing it to slip from her hands. She nodded to him, and he left without sparing her a glance. Something during the raid had upset him, she could tell, but it was not her place to question it. She sat down on the bench and began cleaning the weapon. As she wiped it down, she took note of the number of missing teeth, the dents and scratches in the metal, the bits of flesh and bone still trapped between what teeth remained.
He really worked you hard this time, old friend.
Better than being the poor sap cut down by that thing.
A voice behind her quipped. Malia looked over her shoulder. It was Tanner, one of the other slaves. He was middle-aged, rugged and lithe, with wild brown hair and cynical eyes of the same hue. His hands were calloused and weathered with blood-stained nails. That blood was old, brown and flaking from his fingers, constantly renewed from his work. His assigned task was tanning the human skins the Night Lords liked to wear, hence the nickname. At the moment, he carried a bundle of them over one shoulder, as casually as a sack of provisions.
Just saying. That weapon must be a nightmare for whoever's on the receiving end.
From what she'd gathered in prior conversations, he'd worked in a corpse guild before the Astartes raided his hive. The experience gave him a no-nonsense attitude toward death, which Malia respected. He was her only real acquaintance, if not quite a friend, among the menials, slaves, and crew. In fact, he was the only other slave with whom she could hold a proper conversation. Some sisters of the Blessed Hymn might have called that romance, a concept completely foreign to Malia. Phyllis had tried explaining it to her once, but had given up when Malia just continued to stare blankly. Presently, in the back of her mind, she could almost hear Phyllis urging her to speak with him more often, to take comfort in his company in place of hers. She even imagined her sister giving her a playful physical shove towards the man, or dragging her forward if necessary. She smiled to herself. Phyllis, ever the optimist, would have definitely tried that.
Well, you're not wrong. I killed plenty with this sword before Garek decided to use it.
I can believe that.
Tanner moved to the bench opposite her and set the skin bundle down. Then, sitting beside the skins, he brought out a thick needle and a long line of rough thread, and began stitching different skins together into cloaks and sashes. Malia resumed her maintenance work.
What are you doing in here anyway?
She asked him a while later.
The armory's a bit far from the flaying pits, isn't it?
Tanner shrugged, then tied off a stitch and threaded the needle again.
It's quieter in here.
He began the next skin cloak.
The masters brought a fresh batch of slaves aboard tonight. I heard this time the fresh meat was poached from an agri-world.
Huh.
Malia unscrewed and removed the chainsword's casing, revealing the full extent of the damage to its teeth. She began removing the broken chain.
Let me guess. They're all scared out of their minds and praying for the corpse god's mercy?
More or less.
Tanner shook his head and paused his work for a moment, looking up to meet Malia's eyes. He grinned slightly.
Screams of pain I can handle. It's the complaining I can't stand.
Same here.
They shared a moment of sardonic laughter, then resumed their tasks. Within the hour, the armory filled with more bodies, some slaves, some servitors, and Tanner moved over to Malia's bench to avoid them. She didn't notice him doing so. Her focus was on her old weapon, which she'd finished repairing and reconstructing shortly after. Then, standing, she lifted the weapon skyward and studied her work. It was perfect, better than when she'd first received it. She couldn't remember the last time her chainsword had gleamed so brightly.
Malia?
Said Tanner, though his voice sounded distant.
Are you all right?
She didn't respond, merely gazed at her old weapon. A strange feeling stirred in her chest. It might have been pride, but that word didn't seem right. No, she realized. It was longing, desire, yearning. A hunger that she hadn't realized she'd been suffering until now. A gnawing at her core, her soul, for the exhilaration of battle. Enforcing the will of the Night Lords had brought fights in scraps and fragments. But those were not battles, nor proper wars. There was no challenge to be found in those engagements. They were no fun at all. Had it really been half a year since she'd last tasted true victory? Since she'd been challenged by a stronger foe? She groaned aloud, wistful and ravenous. What she would give for one more proper fight. Malia found herself instinctively shifting to a battle stance. She missed the feel of wielding her blade. Now it was in her hands again. She wanted to use it. Surely Garek wouldn't mind if she tested her repairs. Hands tightening around the hilt, she lifted the weapon above her head, then brought it down fast and hard in a routine practice swing. She sighed with satisfaction. It felt good. Really good. Like a release of tension she hadn't realized had been plaguing her. She swung again, this time activating the blades, releasing even more of that tension. The sound of the spinning chain teeth was comforting to her ears. She continued swinging her old sword, now putting her full strength and skill behind it. She smiled and imagined she was back on the battlefield, hacking down enemies that dared come within her striking range. Her smile grew wider as she imagined the blood of those enemies spraying against her skin. Malia laughed with elation and bloodlust, reliving her battle frenzy like greeting an old friend. Tanner looked up at the sister trepidly. Something about her silence unnerved him. He could understand taking pride in her work, repairing the sword which had once been hers. But there was nothing proud in her posture or expression. It was something else. No, not just something else. Malia herself was somewhere else, her eyes gazing past the sword as if recalling an old memory.
Malia.
The man stood up, carefully setting down the skins he'd been sewing, and reached out to her slowly. They were only a few inches apart in height, and at this angle, he could clearly see that something was very wrong. Her eyes glinted with a menacing hunger he did not recognize.
Did you hear me?
It wasn't her silence that troubled him, but that her mind, it seemed, was beginning to unravel. He'd grown fond of Malia since meeting her months ago. She was the only other mortal with whom he could speak honestly and casually. He liked her carefree demeanor and her boldness in ever calling any of the Astartes Lord. She was a valuable friend and comrade aboard the Slayer's Vow. However, the woman before him now was a stranger in her skin. Then she groaned, and he instantly withdrew his hand. There was nothing sane nor human about that sound. It was like hearing the growl of a starving predator robbed of prey. It chilled him worse than walking in on the masters still skinning their victims. Instinctively, he stepped back as well.
Malia!
He repeated, his voice wary and low.
Come on, this isn't funny. Snap out of it, will ya?
She still neither heard nor acknowledged him. He took another instinctive step away from her when she began absent-mindedly shedding her clothing, stripping down to the wrappings she'd stained red to mimic her old repentia rags. She kept her hold and eyes on the sword, her interface ports and augmetic glinting dully in the dimness of the armory. Then she took a fighting stance, and his eyes widened with fear.
Oh no.
Tanner took yet another step back as Malia lifted the sword, quickly retreating out of her combat range. She brought the chainsword down with such speed and force that he felt the wind that followed the swing, even from where he stood.
No, no, no!
She smiled savagely and prepared another strike. He spun and ran for the door.
Out! Get out! Everybody out!
The servitors did not understand his sudden warning, and so were slain grotesquely when Malia swung her sword again. The menials and slaves froze in terror at the sisters' sudden blood-fueled frenzy. Then the screams began, as those too slow to realize the danger were slaughtered where they stood. Those with enough sense turned in panic, trampling each other in their attempts to flee. Many failed to dodge Malia's swinging, whirring eviscerator. The cracks and squelches of severed bones and torn flesh filled the armory, fresh blood joining the drying puddles left by the Night Lords before. The woman's maddened laughter was audible over the noise. Tanner tripped on his severed arm, but caught himself quickly and continued to sprint. A few surviving slaves caught up with him, demanding to be first in escaping. One nearly shoved him aside, but was caught in Malia's frenzy. Tanner did not help him, only leapt over his corpse. Only he made it past the threshold, alive and intact. When he looked back inside the armory, there was Malia, smiling and laughing with childlike delight, her swings and spins and flips blending seamlessly into a terrible dance of death. She followed the momentum of her massive sword, wielding it with both brutality and grace, her skin and hair slick with blood, the body parts around her doing nothing to impede her steps. Tanner could see then why she'd been nicknamed after her weapon. She and the blade were one, long, toned, ruthless and precise. And in that moment, she was beautiful to behold. Swallowing hard, he tore his gaze away and bolted down the corridor, seeking out one of the masters. The ship was massive, however, and it took him several minutes to even cross paths with one of them. He ran into Rigur, his momentum slamming him into the warrior Ceramite. The Night Lord looked down at the man, and the crimson lenses of his helmet glowed menacingly, as if in spite and indignation.
Watch yourself,
he growled through his vox grill. Tanner straightened and caught his breath, clutching his broken nose. He licked the blood off his lips without realizing.
Apologies, Lord, but it's urgent.
Rigur paused briefly and studied the man. taking in the splattered blood that was clearly not his own.
What happened?
The main armory. Malia, she's gone berserk. She's killed everyone.
The Night Lord did not ask for any elaboration, but darted around Tanner and sped down the hall at full speed, knocking over the slaves and servitors that failed to move away in time. Tanner followed, though he knew he couldn't keep pace. He had to know, had to see what would become of Malia. Would the Masters subdue her, kill her? A terrible thought came unbidden to his mind. Would they even be able to? The question made him run faster than he ever had in his life. Rigur reached the armory within minutes of Tanner finding him, halting for a moment by the open door to gawk at the spectacle before him. Bodies, some dead, some dying, lay about the chamber in various amounts of flesh. The floor was no longer metal, but a tarn of human blood and servitor oils. Limbs, organs, bones, and more lay haphazardly strewn in that tarn, some hanging gruesomely from the implements on the walls. The Night Lord briefly thought a world eater had somehow snuck on board the ship, then saw Malia in the center of it all, laughing, smiling, and dancing in the blood, the eviscerated chainsword seemingly weightless in her hands, her crimson-soaked wrappings hugging her frame. Cursing in Nostraman, Rigur shook off his initial surprise and drew his own chainblade, then charged at the demented sister. She dodged his first strike purely by chance, her dance-like movement saving her from death. Then, halting mid-spin, she noticed he was there, and her eyes widened with inhuman delight.
Space Marine,
She said. Her tone dripped with such batter-lust, she may well have been actually salivating.
I get to fight a Space Marine.
Malia!
Said Rigur, circling her cautiously.
Or, if you even are still Malia.
The Slayer's vow was not currently in warp space, but given the carnage she'd wrought, her being possessed would not have surprised him.
Put down that sword.
A woman simply laughed.
Make me!
She exclaimed, then raised her sword and charged. Rigur parried her strike with ease, then quickly countered. She spun out of the way, her weapon following her momentum. He blocked the horizontal slice of the eviscerator and shoved the woman back. She rolled into the fall, then stood, still smiling, and came at him again and again. He matched her blow for blow. And all the while, the blood tarns splashed about their heels, the armory walls dripping with gore like the innards of some terrible beast. Behind his helmet, Rigur frowned. He had come expecting to subdue the battle sister. He had not expected her to present a challenge. Regardless of her strength and skill, she was but a woman. And no woman could possibly best an Astartes in single combat, let alone an Astartes in full armor. It was unheard of. And yet here she was, a sister of battle without her armor, dueling him with undisciplined ferocity, her strength and speed on par with his own. He blink-clicked a direct vox link to his captain as he countered another of Malia's swings.
Garek, I need your assistance in the armory, now!
Quit yelling, brother,
The captain replied.
Whatever it is, I am sure you can handle it.
Your damn slave has lost her mind.
He ducked and dodged yet another strike from the eviscerator, slicing at her as he rose. She blocked and countered him, laughing maniacally.
She's massacred at least 30 other slaves.
Then subdue her. Why bother me with...
Garek!
Rigur let his full concern and unease into his voice, silencing his brother completely.
You don't understand. She's keeping pace with me.
He closed the vox without preamble and returned his attention to the maddened sister. Their battle continued for several minutes, each of them striking, blocking, countering, evading, the stalemate unending. She laughed all the while, like a carefree child at play. At one point, Rigur noticed her speed increase, and so doubled his efforts.
How is this possible?
He growled through his vox grill.
What makes you so fast?
Malia paused her strikes for a moment, and the Night Lord met her gaze. She was no longer smiling, but staring at him blankly, as if he'd said something she could not believe.
Because of the red.
She told him, as if he were a fool.
Obviously.
Rigur gawked behind his helm.
Huh? What nonsense are you spewing?
She blinked twice, their fight momentarily forgotten, her eye twitching suddenly as she held his gaze. Then her nose leaked crimson, her blood mixing with the rest already splattered on her face.
What do you mean?
She said finally, her voice hoarse and tight, as if she was suddenly in pain.
What did I say?
Rigur said nothing, but continued to gawk. This woman, he concluded, was unbelievable, and most definitely insane. He could think of no way to proceed or approach her as she lowered her eyes to her weapon.
Oh.
Now her voice, low and distant, once more dripped with madness.
Am I fighting someone? Can I keep fighting them?
Rigur tensed and lifted his chainblade, preparing to parry her again. Then, in a midnight blur, Garek sped past him and slammed Malia to the floor, her temple cracking audibly as his ceramite fist made contact. She groaned once, but did not rise. The captain remained motionless as he stood over the woman, his breath escaping his vox grill in a soft, horrible growl. Rigur stayed still as well, ready and alert in case she was faking unconsciousness.
Said
Tanner from the doorway.
Is she dead?
No,
said the Night Lords in unison. Garek glanced over his shoulder and addressed the mortal man.
Was she provoked?
No, Lord. She just went berserk.
When?
Once she finished repairing the sword.
The captain shifted to face Rigur.
It could be what madness,
said the latter.
Perhaps, but it is unlikely. Zephyrius is obsessed with maintaining the Geller field as she is her servitor hobby.
Garek turned to Tanner.
Were you the only survivor?
Yes, Lord.
The man swallowed hard, apparently still in shock.
I tried to warn the others when I realized what was about to happen.
He stared at the gory mess that was the armory, his eyes haunted and afraid.
I guess they didn't understand.
Clearly not,
Rigur mumbled.
Get yourself to the apothecarium, Tanner,
said Garek, ignoring his brother's comment.
There's no need for you to stay here.
Beneath him, Malia groaned again, her breath creating little bubbles in the blood tarn. Slowly, with effort, she rose unsteadily to her knees, one hand still gripping her chainsword as she rubbed her forehead with the other.
What happened?
She croaked. The Night Lords turned their eyes to her, their helmets veiling their wary stares.
You don't remember?
Asked Rigur. The woman squinted and furrowed her brow, as if trying to recall a memory long forgotten.
I don't.
What do you remember?
Asked Garek.
I finished the repairs, then tested them.
Malia only now seemed to notice all the carnage, though she clearly did not register it fully. She looked down at the weapon in her hand, her eyes and expression vague and discomfited.
I guess I got carried away.
That is the understatement of the millennium! You crazy, ridiculous wench!
The floor beneath them suddenly trembled with a boom of rending metal, the blood and offal shifting as if caught in an ocean's tide. Klaxons blared and lumens pulsed scarlet in tandem with each other. In the corridor, slaves and menials yelled in fear. Rigur once again cursed in Nostraman.
Kagot.
What was that?
Cried Tanner. seemingly more frightened by the sudden alarms than Malia's butchery. Garek drew his bolt pistol and sprinted past them.
We've been boarded.